Welcome to Healing the Spirit, a space where we awaken our creativity, deepen our connections, and remember who we are through the lens of astrology, archetypes, and art making. I'm your host, Jonathan Coe. Hello everyone, welcome to this episode of Healing the Spirit. I am super excited and super honored to share with you this very juicy conversation that I had with my friend, with my colleague, Christopher. You may follow their work on Instagram at The Red Read. This is a conversation that really spans many different topics, and yet I think it's really all directed towards the idea of what is a reading and what does it mean to be a reader and what does it mean to read, which is a word that we really use a lot in this community of astrologers, of tarot readers, of diviners, energy readers. But I don't think we often really sit down to think about what does this word mean to us, and what are the ways in which this idea of a reading may be a continuation of and also may defy the ways that we've been using that word read, or reading, right? We also spoke quite a lot about teaching. So if you are interested in teaching, if you're interested in the idea of what it means to be cultivating community of seekers who are mostly adults and who are bound together by an interest to learn and a desire to learn outside spaces of conventional colonial education systems, then you've definitely come to the right place. So let me introduce Christopher by way of their bio. Christopher is an educator, astrologer, writer, and tarot scholar. Their work interweaves knowledge of astrology, mythology, tarot, feminist, queer knowing, and being to create a dynamic space of exalted spiritual regard. Their readings are a constellation of consciousness, a channel for healing, and a tool for decolonization. The classes, readings, and writings work to give and facilitate new ways of reading the world and the self, to empower the writing of a new world, and to revise worn-out self-concepts. In Christopher's tradition, literacy in all its forms is the legacy of liberation. I think you can already tell from just reading Christopher's bio that there's such a poetic quality to their work, and also it's just incredible. I sat with Christopher's work before this conversation, and in many ways they really spoke to me and they also really challenged me. So you'll get to hear this is a conversation between two suns in seventh house people. So my sun in Pisces is in my seventh house, and Christopher's sun in Scorpio is in their seventh house. We spoke about the idea of Nepantla, the idea of being a diviner, of being connected to some sort of divine and being aware, and conscious of our connection to the divine. We spoke about the role of faith in reclaiming ourselves, reclaiming our place in the world. We spoke about literacy, which is a huge part of Christopher's work, as well as the role of literacy in liberation. We also, as I mentioned, talked quite a lot about this idea of what a reading is and what teaching means, especially when we create our own creative teaching spaces for folks who are deeply interested and curious in learning, and for whom more traditional forms of education may or may not have been a good fit. We spoke about this idea of being a liberatory prophet, as well as Christopher talked a lot in their work too about this idea of erotic knowledge. So we got into all of that, and I hope that you take in this conversation, that you allow this conversation to speak to you both on an intellectual and also on a deep level. And I look forward to seeing you on the other side. Here's my conversation with Christopher. Welcome, Chris. Thank you for being on the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm honored to be here.
Yeah, I am just so excited to have this conversation with you. Prior to recording, I feel like I've been kind of like in a bit of a Chris love fest over here, just because I'm just so enjoying being with your writings, listening to your conversations with Sabrina. And yeah, I feel like, and I really mean this when I say it, but I feel myself already kind of sprouting out and becoming a different person just by reading your work. So I think that really speaks to how powerful your magic is as a practitioner. And so I just can't wait for this conversation. So thank you for being here. Thank you for like being in this dimension, and I feel very honored to have you here.
Blow me away. Oh my gosh, what a welcome. Thank you. I don't even I'm trying to receive that. That was a big blessing, and I'm very harsh on myself in terms of my own writing, and especially I'm always like, oh, that's not really it. Like it's all like my scratch stuff I feel like I put out there in a sense. And so I really appreciate that, because then I don't want to become so critical that I don't share, knowledge or just like what comes naturally. Of course, there's an honoring of like the ebb and the flow in terms of filling my own reservoir and just like attending to what is unseen currently. But I really, really appreciate that. And I really enjoy your work and your voice. It's like I'm like a, Taurus placement. We'll get into it. I already know, but like it's like so much truth for me is so auditory and audio, like sensory. And so I really appreciate you and your work and the resonance. Absolutely. Thank you again.
Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate hearing that, because my voice is definitely a point of contention for a very long time for me. Just, it took me a very long time to even like how I sounded. But, it is a working relationship, and I think I'm coming to a point where I can begin to appreciate it. But and really for me, my voice is interesting because I've always loved using my voice. I didn't really like the end product, but I really liked the process of using it. So maybe that's something you can resonate with as well. I think something that I really love from your writing is the fact that, and I was kind of telling you a little bit in an email exchange that we had beforehand, but I feel your writing to be very concentrated and almost crystallized. And it's like gazing at a gemstone or something like that. Like it's like looking at a crystal quartz and knowing that that's like, many, many years in the making. And it's like these little phrases that it forces me to slow down, because I think your writing is so potent and condensed. And yeah, I'm just excited to see what wants to come through today, because I feel like there are these portals that we can begin opening, and I have no idea how long each of these portals will be. So we'll just see, where Saturn takes us. But I like to begin my conversations always with just asking whoever has graciously come to the podcast to situate me in the present moment for themselves. I'd love to hear who you feel, sense, or know yourself to be in this present moment, in this chapter in your life.
Wow. So much. What a great question. Thank you for that. It's in flux. I feel in a state of liminality, which is like take a shot, if you're listening, because that word is everyone's favorite word. But Nepantla, like in the bardo, like in just this death transmutation process that I'm really tending to, and I'm really seeing how far I've come with just the struggle and the burden and the toll it takes on my body in terms of arriving at language, arriving at an articulation, arriving at something to share, something to say, some sort of insight to hopefully
Mm.
distill and offer to others. It's been definitely a long walk to get here, and I know I'm not done also, but I feel resilient, honestly, at this moment. Like I'm showing up very resilient and very, uh, very gentle, but also like tenacious in terms of my own transformational process, which is like I feel very potent right now in this, like today, but also just like these past couple years that I've been going through. So yeah, that's where I
Yeah.
am.
Wow. I love that word, resilient
Mm.
and tenacious that you shared there. I think there's something so, like, I feel your Scorpio here. So I'm almost like wanting to jump into that.
Yeah.
If you don't mind, I'd love to hear more about your story and how you got here.
Yeah.
And maybe a little bit about your practice, what modalities, because I know that you kind of, you mentioned Nepantla. I feel it in your work. Like there is a lot of different, your work feels to me like a confluence of different things.
Mm.
And I also appreciated feeling like, and feel free to let me know if this doesn't resonate, but it almost feels like there's a way that specifically when I was looking at your tarot offerings that you are using tarot as like a tool, as the front, as the mask of the Wizard of Oz, but actually you're kind of doing something else. Like there's a larger universe that is at play here, that is a larger force that is kind of animating the work. So that really fascinates me. And also, I'm curious to hear about your sun, moon, rising. I know I just basically tacked on like 50 questions there for you, but feel free
I
to
mean, my
start
Mars and
wherever you
Sag
want.
wants it and can handle it. I love it. Yes. I love it. Um, yeah, tarot is a Trojan horse, basically, is
Mhm.
my whole thing, honestly. Like you got it kind of there. It's such a great outward face and it's so rich, and it just I'm like, come study with me, and then you're gonna get like Toni Morrison and bell hooks and like, all these radical thinkers and writers and ancestors. And tarot is a confluence. It's really been a great point to arrive at in terms of utilizing it as a modality, as a system that interweaves astrology, but also allows a sort of continuity, um, like an essential continuity in terms of me and my work and my vocation. My vocation rather than my profession.
Mhm.
My calling, as we were talking about previously, right, and not just my career. And
Yeah.
so, from a young age, I've like my work and me is just centered around education as a practice of freedom.
Mm.
And so this is in Paulo Freire's like legacy and the legacy of bell hooks, especially like those two are really such primary teachers of mine. And I know everyone obviously, I mean, those are big names, but like, but I go deep, in my Mercury
Mhm.
Scorpio fashion. It's not like I'm not like, oh,
Mhm.
cool, that was like all about love, iconic. I read it anytime I pull Queen of Swords or the Three of Swords in particular. But it's like she has this beautiful depth of work that I like I really study, I really take it seriously. And so anyhow, um yes, I am queer, I'm non-binary, and my gender is a constant construction. I am brown, I'm Mexican American, I'm indigenous. I um have just I have a Venus in Scorpio.
Mm.
I'm a Taurus rising, and
Mm.
so a detrimented chart ruler. And I have a Libra moon. I have Aphrodite, the asteroid, exactly on my ascendant as well. So just so Venusian
Mm.
over here. And
Mm.
then I'm a Scorpio sun. I have a massive Scorpio stellium in the seventh. And so,
Yeah.
Yes, I think a lot of my work has been motivated from the innate awareness of difference and from like education as a practice of freedom implies a bondage in ignorance,
Mm.
right? In terms of like Paulo Freire was a high priestess, and in terms of his like whole articulation is about unveiling the world and the power dynamics that keep certain people oblivious to their states of suffering and their material circumstance. And
Yeah.
so the process of raising my consciousness has preceded tarot, obviously, right? It's been a major focus in terms of like the greater levels of consciousness that I can attain through education, through reading and learning and talking and discussing and um, finding my own voice and my many voices, um, and singing along and loving, as you were saying, like the use of my voice, like the
Mm.
auditory quality of it, like laying on my wood floor, hearing it reverberate, right? Kind of
Mm-hmm.
is it wakes you up. It is an alarm in a sense that like snaps you out of the fog of like whatever it is and just brings you back into the like energetic soul of the body.
Yeah.
And so I've always had that connection, and then I have my master's and my single subject teaching credential in English. I went to UC Santa Cruz and was disappointed with the institution and was very upfront and adamant and clear about being anti-racist, feminist, queer educator, like with a mission. Like this is not like education is not neutral.
Mm-hmm.
And I had an amazing first year, like Jupiter return before I knew it was my Jupiter return first year teaching, like officially teaching, and then could not get hired. And I came home and it was like this big pivot and this big tower moment, and tower came back into my life, and I just kind of went all in and found um, through faith this just following faith, following a calling in terms of affirming my own training as a teacher, as someone who can conduct like and coordinate, like it's like an orchestra director, what have you, at the symphony, like I'm like coordinating all the parts of the years and like where everyone's sort of consciousness and learning states are at and what they need, the materials to bring in, trusting in that own ability and just kind of going independent. And so tarot and the confluence of astrology and also breaking out of a capitalist construction of time orientation and the ways that our body is labored in time and exploited, right? To a cosmic orientation of time, and then my own inner soul development and like synchronizing to my own sort of rhythms, right? My own emotional energetic rhythms has been the aid. Like tarot just was like the crown jewel in terms of like my thesis of like larger realization, this project of like education as
Mm-hmm.
a whole, that I feel like I'm really concluding with my Saturn return. Like
Mm.
I only have one more hit left. And so that was a lot as well. Like again, you give me the questions, I will bring it back, but but I'll stop there for now.
I love that, and I think this process that you're speaking to about moving away from the capitalist construction of time into the cosmic view and experience, I would say, of time has been a major feature, I think, in a lot of us who found ourselves in this weird liminal divinatory space.
Mm.
What I find so interesting is you were using the word bondage and also disappointment, and that in the unveiling, it can feel like taking so many steps back because,
Mm.
we invest so much of our time kind of moving in a direction, right, that has been prescribed to us by society without a lot of questioning around the ingredients and sort of the recipe behind that direction to begin with, right? So it is taking a step back. It is kind of remembering a part of us that has felt kind of that we've been conditioned to forget. I know that one of the questions that came up for me, or one of the musings that I have, is this idea around what role faith plays in your own journey and through your own positionality and perspective in terms of a process of reconstitution, like
Mm.
reconstituting yourself in a system that was kind of designed for your failure.
Mm.
Hmm.
Mm. Wow, so rich. by progression, my Scorpio stellium is like now a Sag stellium. And so faith is it. Faith is so it. If like I would cease to exist if I did not have faith. And faith, it's I mean, it's a process of untangling, because I still am such an advocate for, like, I just want to promote literacy and educate. Like, everyone should be educated. Everyone should read. Everyone should be able to read and write. And of
Mm-hmm.
course, like, again, this is I being at this interesting confluence of like citizen of the world, but also like, like bastard of America kind of, like the literal, I mean, I have American citizenship, but there's still all these ways that, we are othered and like denied belonging for all of these historical reasons. And so, but in the American tradition, um, literacy is the practice of liberation. It was illegal to teach the enslaved to read and write. And of course, what was being propagated was the Bible, right? And so, like,
Mm-hmm.
and now we still see the strong faith of course, Black and brown people, right? And how they were able to distill and discriminate and have and I mean, or the faculty of discrimination in terms of being able to resonate with spirit coming through and to sing and to have that like point of suffering that like carves this container in the soul to hold so much faith,
Mm-hmm.
so much surrender to higher assistance and to a collective assistance that like endures, um, is it's like they're inseparable in terms of learning to read, getting yourself free, and then also the component of spirituality being either used to subjugate you and have like an oppressing God, and like here's someone being the shadow of the Hierophant and translating like this is what the Bible says, rather than like, Bell Hooks is an avid Christian. Well, was a Christian. You know what I mean? Woman, like she was in that realm, but she was so an advocate of liberation, clearly, and it's like freed and helped to free so many people. But so with that takes time again to transmute, as you're saying, and to reconstitute from losing a native religion, losing a native, like the violent amnesia imposed upon us that separates us from our just ancestral birthright of being in alignment with the cosmos, being able to read and understand with shamanic states and alternate states of consciousness, alternate ways of knowing, that faith is just constantly like leading me and transforming me. But it was just always so real. Like it was never like I was, my family is sort of Catholic culturally, but it wasn't like very strict or any. I had a lot of spaciousness in terms of being able to develop my own faith in the way that like spirit speaks to and through me.
Yeah.
And yeah, I don't know if that was a clean answer to your question, but it just sort of it gets me going, right? Like
It's gorgeous. It's gorgeous. I love it. You wrote, by giving and facilitating new ways of reading the world and the self, we are empowered to write a new world and to revise worn out self concepts. In my tradition, literacy in all its forms is the legacy of liberation. On a deep level, I really felt that. And I know the power and the truth of that. And I think what I'm excited to kind of have you expand upon is this idea of literacy, because I think in our colonial education, reading has a very specific connotation, right? It was just like reading written words. But I'm feeling that what you're saying is a lot deeper than that. Like there is a way of reading the world, our cultural context that extends beyond just written word. And also it extends beyond the supremacy of the written word, right? Which often is has been used as a tool. So I guess I'm just expressing that I really love that you're in this Napantla because
yes.
there's an aspect, I think, of your work that is challenging for those of us who want to be interacting with it. There's a challenge because it's like you're entering the space of like and we kind of need to, like, I don't have words for it, but it's just like that guttural sense of like we need to crack more space within it, So yeah, just sharing that and putting that on your court and wanting to hear more about this idea of what reading means to you.
Mm. I I also love that. Like such a like me, I'm such a malefic, Jupiter and Scorpio. It's Jupiter, hey, double benefic there, Jupiter, Venus, and Mercury. But it is like absolutely like come and we'll crack open some space. Like I will cut you because I love you kind of energy, right? And I know I
Yes.
kind of can have had those moments come through in our time together, just in other spaces, in Sabrina's space. So that's so funny to hear. And there is that. I mean, okay, so Mars, which rules Scorpio, um, in the tarot is the Tower. And I think that's an important part of entering into, like, that is the experience you're talking about, where obviously institutions falling, nature being on our side, triumphing over man's culture and their egoic, constructions of power and success and hierarchy and what have you. But that card is the moment where a belief that we've had, like a worldview or a construct, is violated. What was inviolable suddenly is overturned. What you thought would never happen to you happens to you, right? Like all of a sudden your world shatters. And that is a real gift, because all of us, there is that then opening to transformation, right? Where you like lessen your ego or your mental your narrative and the grip it has over your body, and your authentic sort of natural movement and voice as well lessens. And all of a sudden faith can come in, and that faith can become internalized, and it become like, it's been this whole process where I had such a negative critic voice in my head all the time, tormenting me, just a lot of internalized torment, and internalized punishment and all of these things. And sometimes fear, like the voice of fear comes up, or anxiety or whatever it is. But through my spiritual practice, through my reading of the world, I've been able to clearly identify the sources of real power abuse. Like, it's also not like Pollyanna, like I'm just gonna, I mean, yes, affirmations and things, but it's like, no, I've done the deep looking at and the reading of and the exploring of how much trauma and just like just this world that we've inherited, that takes many books and many words and a lot of time to sit with. And so like Paulo Freire, his reading of the world to illiterate people, to Brazilians who he was teaching, he would bring images of the conditions of their lives, and they would arrive at language together, right? And he would ask them questions, provoke them, and get them to do a double take, a triple take, and not to take for granted what falls into the background of the subconscious in terms of like your waking life, right? And so, and I also studied like some semiotics in school. I was in my undergrad, I studied communications, I studied media and the messages of the media, and I kind of had wanted to become, I in early school wanted to do investigative journalism, Mercury and Scorpio, like hello, and tell the truth and just like hold people accountable and like uncover the secrets. But then I understood at a larger power, like it was like you uncover the secrets of the whole institution as a whole, and like how do you then, there's no like one person to hold accountable to that in terms of like a simple villain or a clean villain in a sense, right? And so everything is a text, like your fridge is a text, like what you're watching is a text, what you're listening to, like our dynamic, like everything can be read. And this is why I love, again, tarot reading, because it then it was a continuous extension of reading. We're reading the cards, but we're reading the cards, but we're reading your psyche, we're reading what's happening in the body, and in having like a shadow mirror that like reflects those states, it keeps us accountable to, and like pushes back against the internalized voice of the dominator, the oppressor. And I think such space is needed, because when you've been conditioned and when you've been caged for so long, you mistrust your natural impulse to joy and to pleasure and to relaxation and to sexual desire, romantic desire, all those things you had to like train yourself away from. And so the body has such an innate spiritual intelligence that is like beyond verbal, but it does come through in moments, and like obviously the verbal articulation, but sometimes it's just, you have to see it, you have to just read it in the ways it's communicating, vocally and written and beyond, right? Like all of the languages, all the colors of the rainbow,
Absolutely. Absolutely. I love that. And I think this idea that a reading, which often, in the spiritual industrial complex, we can have this idea of a reading looking a certain way, like sitting in front of this oracle-like person and them telling you the things that you don't know. When actually, I think the more readings I've done and received, the more I see that it is more about opening up space to investigate what is happening and alive within you. And I kind of want to continue down this path because there's something that I think is fascinating that you're teasing out here that is lit up within me around the idea of what a reading even is. And also what you've learned from the experiences of doing readings, of both for yourself and for others, and how that shifted over time for you.
I love this question. This is like, as a teacher, I try and keep the thread in terms of measuring the learning of my students in ways that are equitable, and like that's like a whole thing, right? But in sort of like in similar to communication, that what I'm getting across, what I'm saying is communicating the intent. And so of course that's what I so want for my classes, is like them to understand what a reading is. And it's something I'm exploring and expanding, and like have these moments of crystalline articulation and then like fall off a little bit, but I'm with it. And so I really appreciate that, because that is so even why I teach, right? And so the reading, the reading is recalibration. I think the reading is this point where I see it as like, as if we're clay, and like the parts of us where we're maybe cracking and like dehydrated or what have you, like the reading comes and it like soothes over, and it is the voice of spirit. It is the voice of truth, of faith, of honesty, of confrontation. It's all of those things getting cohered, right, and reflected back to you, so that it's not simply like, this is what this card means for you, like that. There's that level to it, but it's the symphony of it. It's like a personalized song. It's a personalized experience that has healing tone to it. And so, Toni Morrison talks about this as well. It's like the telling of a story and the evoking of its truth through its, metaphor and its fiction, if you will, is as much in the timbre and the tone and the delivery of the reading as is the content. Right. And so I do like want my students to like have that basis of like learning your ABCs in a sense, and like really having a strong foundation for like the visual component of what you're getting at, but like enter into the psychic landscape. And it's like, this person needs to see this thing. You know what I mean? They need to hear this thing in particular. So how do you say that in such a way that like gets them to really hear and come back into the moment? I feel like a reading is calling you home. A reading is like, oh yes, like, thank you. Because sometimes we can, like, when you're trying to revise and revise, I feel like you're just ripping paper after paper and crumbling them, and you're like losing your mind a little bit. And so the reader comes and they're like, let me read you and your sort of book. Let me pull out, Jonathan, Sabrina, like whoever, like the book of you out in a sense, and offer as a way to honor you, my own like my delivery of the soul that I'm seeing before me. Right. It's like my own cover, if you will, of like your narrative, and let me spin it, and what new thing comes out of the way that I read it versus a different reader, and everyone has this beautiful capacity to read, and the capacity of voice. And so like in my class spaces, I love that too, because it's like, rather than, giving a man a fish or what, it's teaching them to fish, it's teaching them to read. I love reading, and I want to be like really, when you would take those like reading, like you'd move up your reading levels in school or whatever it is, the way to measure, like I just couldn't, it just kind of happens, right? But I love seeing others come and deliver a message and see something and put the words together in such a way that like unlocks. Like for me, the reading is an unlocking, is like a shifting, a turning of my own maybe fixed or points of consciousness that feel walled off or something, or like just hard to access.
Wow, I love that. I love this idea of the reading as the unlocking,
Mm,
that feels so potent. And um there's something that you mentioned too about um liberatory prophecy. And for some
yes.
reason that was kind of humming in the back of my mind as I was hearing you talk about doing readings. And I'm curious to hear if there's a connection there. Like,
Mm,
as a reader, how are we liberatory prophets? And how
mm,
can the
mm,
practice of divination, maybe specifically, bring us to um, seeing possibilities that are not available to us unless we tap into that other perspective?
mm. Yeah. Yeah, that is in my tradition, and I loved that is the tradition I'm a part of. I know it's in flux, but like my grandmother was a black woman to me, and there's a lot of colorism and Mexican Latinidad and all of that stuff, but like I'm a part of that black prophetic tradition, of this indigenous tradition. Like it's very mixed in there. And so to give a reading to someone that allows them to see a pathway out of the rubble and out of that state where their worldview, where their life has just been shattered, when the unthinkable has happened,
Mm,
and a certain narrative is no longer viable, or it's no longer like that's what I was working towards. Like, no, I don't know what I'm working towards anymore. I don't know what all that previous effort and struggle was for anymore if it's not this, right? And then the reading comes in at those vital moments and imagines with the person and sees all the parts together, a new ending, a
mm,
continuous ending, and like a future, not even an ending, I'm sorry, but a future,
mhm,
right? And so like for people who've been objectified and who are being killed, it is so radical, it is so freeing to even take up the space, like the audacity to imagine ourselves into the future,
mhm,
right? And of course this gets into like more Afrofuturism, like lines and what have you, but um there is an imaginative quality. But I think like what astrology and what tarot offer uniquely is looking at the birth chart and seeing um just the heed to, like, it is destiny that is calling me, the calling me forward into the future. The thing, it's a part of my soul. It's something that I came here to do that is much more than being like a slave of some sort, right? And all these things, being dominated, being abused. It's not solely why I don't not come here for that. I came here to help heal and to just answer this calling. And so
mm,
liberatory prophecy, I think, is an imagining and an envisioning of yourself in the future that is free, right?
mm,
And it's using the tool of divination, which is specifically centered around the soul in my line, right? And like, I think this is still adaptable, whether you're religious or not, or polytheistic or pagan or witch or whatever it is, right? It's like these, like this acknowledgement that we have a soul sort of at the center of our being is what affirms our humanity and our life, which is so, like, to reclaim that is to reclaim humanity, where to deny that is to enslave humanity, right?
mm,
And that's where
mm,
we've come from. And so like as a teacher in the traditional system, I was teaching to the soul of my students. I would play them Amazing Grace by Aretha Franklin and like the speakers and all the things, and I was having them come to this like articulation. But of course I was still like, it wasn't as full in terms of like centering the soul as a
mm.
necessary part of liberation and criticality and my theory and my practice, as it is now, and being independent and just able to, yeah, put all the threads together in the way that I do, in the
Yeah,
ways that I do.
yeah. It's so interesting because it kind of took me back to a point you were mentioning earlier about having a hard time getting hired, and
Mm,
how I imagine that experience for you right after school must have felt like tower, and it
mm,
took me to something that you wrote about how the tower is a get out of jail free card from God.
mm.
And that
Yeah.
feels really powerful. And it's like almost, I feel it as God saying like, yo, Chris, like that's not where you're meant to be. And you're meant to create this other experience, of the classroom as a different kind of way of remembering the self, rather than like remembering for an exam, maybe a remembering of a different kind of knowledge. I think there was something in your writing where you mentioned erotic knowledge. You wrote, tarot helps us scrutinize all parts of our existence as erotic knowledge empowers us to do. And I'd love to hear you tease more of that out. This idea of the erotic knowledge is so interesting and so intriguing to me.
Thank you. Well, yeah, and I know you're teaching here, and you're doing this work of making these alternative spaces of learning. And like, I pursued getting a master's in teaching credential, of course, and like the training. One, because I take the craft seriously, and like the role, like teaching is not just something I decided to do one day because I had the skills, like the craft of tarot or divination or reading or writing. You know, it's its own craft. Teaching is its own craft. And so I respect it as such. But it was from the vision of the classroom being this liberatory space where it's just like I just love learning with people and talking in like in a Socratic style with folks, and creating this beautiful thing of language together where there was none, where there was understanding where there was none, where there's faith where there was none, where there's humanity and recognition where there was none, and in a communal space and in a communal sense that goes beyond like, you know, a levership thing. And so it's very 10 of Cups, 10 of Pentacles for me, and I just like so love being in community and like seeing you do that work as well. And yeah, and then into erotic knowledge with the tarot it's a way of, like, I see the cards as cues, you know, either they very much, the suits relate to the different parts of the body and like your emotional body, right? Like more of like the spiritual calling, as we're saying, like the path of your soul, but like your physical, like literal physical body, like your mental state, anxiety, depression. And I like to give students certain cards, like when this card is coming up, like you might like pay attention to your anxiety levels, or pay attention to if you've been sitting too long, like if you need to go out and exercise, or your sexual, like all these things are so direct in the body. But we don't often validate them as authoritative sources of knowledge, in terms of like, oh, well, my spirit or my intuition said this, or my heart is telling me this, or I feel this grief inside. But because of, again, the voice of capitalism and, you know, all of that, like just so mute, so gray, so detached from the body, whereas this body is this rich authority source of knowledge and our own lived experience. And so I think that tarot attunes me to my own erotic knowledge in that way. It's uncanny.
I love that so much, and I think this has been something that's coming up in my learning spaces, which is this idea that, you know, rather than, if something comes up, right, quickly labeling that as maybe like not part of tradition, or that's not how we usually understand this archetype, rather trusting that that impulse was leading us somewhere, and creating a space where people can also follow that down, right? Because, for example, recently we had this experience in our learning container where we brought up the idea of Venus and Mars, you know, and how in the Thema Mundi they are opposite from each other. So we talk about them as like a package, and understandably, some people did not feel comfortable with that, right? Like there was something arising in their body from this polarization of the feminine Venus and the masculine Mars. And there's like a way in which their body is kind of saying no, right? So thinking about what does it mean to hold the space for that kind of exploration, you know, even if perhaps that was not convenient to the curriculum that we've created, right? Like maybe we need an extra meetup, or like maybe we need to create an extra thread, or like just creating energetic spaciousness to, you know, and this is something that I would love to talk to you about, Chris, because something I'm personally coming up against in teaching is that what made me such a good student is actually what's kind of stopping me from being the teacher that I know myself to be. And I've found myself catching myself in like these moments of like wanting to immediately give my perspective on something, when actually as a teacher, I'm beginning to realize that opening up space or asking questions or just kind of letting spaciousness fill in the cracks, right, is really potent. Like there's something there for people to explore, and that it's not really even my duty as a teacher to be shortcutting that process for my students, that some of these process needs to happen on their own. So I don't really know if there's a question there, but I'm just curious to hear your thoughts just from all of that.
Absolutely. Yeah, I so support that. I'm so glad that you're braving that uncertainty with your students and giving them the space to like make mistakes or fail or to question or to like not have an answer. I tell my like some, we go through, and in class and thresholds, at least I have, several different tarot offerings. But that is like the foundational piece, the first one, if you will. And we group the cards each week and we rotate, and I'm like, okay, well, you're going to give us a reading of the card this week. And it just gets them comfortable with like, well, and I give them, of course, scaffolding in terms of where to start and how to break it down. But it's also like, trust your intuition and go with it. And if you don't have an immediate, like, don't take my eloquence, if you will, with the cards is like a barometer of where you should or expect it to be or what have you, because like this, I'm the teacher, like I'm the facilitator, like I would hope I'm pretty, eloquent with these things. But it's holding that back. So yes, so the student can struggle a little bit, and that's a process of language making. That's like where the learning is happening. Is when they make those connections themselves. And it takes time, and it takes encouragement and like reflection back as well as a teacher, like affirmation talk moves with students commenting on, back into like with each other and reading for each other. And I always encourage that. But that is something, definitely attention that is just, I think, always negotiated by the teacher for larger consideration of like, you're the overall container holder and with time and what have you. I remember like, especially in formal like teaching, like we'd read our book, like in my English classes, when I was a middle school teacher, and I was like, oh wait, the bell's about to ring. We have to get through this chapter just to keep pace. Like I'm sorry, I'm gonna read. I'm just gonna do my speed reading thing here and appreciate. And so, but there's the balance, of course, and the flexibility, as you were saying, to go where it feels most needed and most authentic. Because for me, it's like the teaching is like I'm giving something, or I'm facilitating, not giving necessarily, but that they need. Like if they can read the world and have a tarot practice after they leave me, I've done my job, and like they will be passed on. And so that takes that flexibility for sure. Like, well, maybe we should add another class or skip class or postpone class or whatever else.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Exactly. Like exercising wisdom where wisdom is being called for, where I think for me, my education in teaching has been sitting in the student space or like playing the student role for so long. Like I have just been a student all my life in all kinds of different capacities. And I think it's kind of given me a specific perspective on the kind of facilitation that I do, which is just trying to be an eternal student while also at the same time realizing that part of facilitating is also enlarging that space. Like what can we do to create more space for different perspectives to exist and to coexist? And I think, what you mentioned earlier was really speaking to me about how, in the dominant culture, in the dominator culture, as you so beautifully put it, there is this way that we kind of prioritize certain ways of knowing and not really other ways of knowing. And that, piece about feeling the sensation of knowledge, right? Or sensation as knowledge feels really powerful. In that same or you wrote somewhere, for those who wish to take responsibility for their pleasure, those who wish to guide their destinies, for regaining feeling from numbness, for picturing our own inner states and processes of psychic transformation opening more and more, like bottoming, for no longer fearing feeling, no longer fearing what we have forgotten or repressed within ourselves. Yeah, I feel like there's something so profound there. And this is so, I really see this as your Taurus rising with your Venus and Scorpio. Because it's like that piece, at the end about no longer fearing what we've forgotten or repressed within ourselves feel really major. And I don't know if I'm just speaking from the perspective of the, kind of spiritual community echo chamber that, admittedly I find myself in, but I feel like a lot of people are in that space right now. We're coming out of the whole 2020 pandemonium and just kind of like not sure what it means to reintegrate back into, I mean, what we left has basically been gone at this point, like 2019 is universes away from
Yeah.
all of us now,
Yeah.
and like when I look back at myself in 2019, like I don't even really know that person anymore, so I guess I'm curious to hear your perspective about how this bodily knowledge and how working with the tarot, what does it, how does that process look like for you and for the students that you hold space for? What does that, what does that process of reclaiming and remembering knowledge in the body look like?
Well, definitely a strong tarot practice, a strong daily tarot practice is something I'm always like, you have to read and you have to write. If you want to
Mm,
be literate, you have to practice in a sense. You have to show up.
mm,
And so half the battle is showing up. And I'm pretty disciplined. It's in terms of showing up. Like it's not it's so ingrained in terms of my own practice with my ritual, and it's helped me expand my ritual. But I do a daily morning read. And then of course I'll read with students, and that'll be a facilitated ritual space. And so we open with an invocation, typically of some sort, whether that's a planetary prayer, a oracle pull, breath work, like literal stretching and just calling in and entering an energetic space, making sure that my students are physically comfortable at all times in terms of like they need to take their camera off and like are just lay down or have their tea or have we take body breaks. I want to make sure that like their literal physical body in our learning space together is not just like a talking head, like down, like it can get so trippy, or
mm-hmm,
you open the channel and it can definitely kind of fry some people. And so we always want to bring it down. But oh my gosh, just so much of what you said, just like thank you so much. You kind of, the like bottoming piece is a pretty spiritual act. I didn't Not a lot of people caught that or commented on that, and this like you're saying, like getting into like this echo chamber where I think we're all trying to make sense, and we're like, is that what's happening? Or we're telling each other like narratives or what have you. We're trying to make sense together, and we're
mm,
trying to find shared language together, which is important. Um, but there's still, like Adrian Rich Wright says, like, this is the oppressor's language, but I need it to talk to you.
mm,
And
mm,
so I feel that when like that's somewhat similar to Disidentification's work by Jose Esteban Munoz, which is like, okay, culture and society has given me this thing to wear. How can I learn to sew and like, have a little makeover and like present it differently than its dominant sort of meaning?
mm,
And so I feel that the tarot pushes me to like a law of transgression within language. It's just my own kind of like, I don't know, my own sense of how to use language. Like you have to definitely know the rules of language. And I can get very Saturnian and in a sense, obviously being an English teacher and what have you, in terms of like Descartes not meaning just whatever you want them to mean in whatever way, right? Like they kind of do pinpoint or like anchor certain knowledges and are communicating a meaning, but then
yeah.
getting to the point where you're constantly like pushing yourself to the edge of like, what does it mean? How does this manifest in your life? And like, um, so we'll get this message. It's almost like dreaming, pulling a reading as well, or like I tell students, it's like we're collectively dreaming, like literally,
Mm.
or going into a gallery, and each card is, you know, a portrait. Like we're curators of art galleries and a reading, and it's just like a blank canvas every time, and we just like, okay, here are the portals today. Um, but and so that can be really beautiful, but then to have that carry on beyond the reading is like the major piece that obviously you're asking about. And sorry, I'm so long-winded to get
No, I
there.
love it. I love it. I'm here for
um
it.
okay. Okay, thank you again. It's just that Mercury Jupiter conjunction, you know, they're like long-winded. But the the reading and like having the daily practice, I think for me, I'm always telling my students, like, when did the reading like fulfill, if you will, like when was the
Mm.
prophecy fulfilled? And
Mm.
sometimes this, and so there's a determining of the scope. Like some readings are like they're reading you for a long thing that you're working towards, and other
Mm.
times you can pull a card and get that sort of activation daily. And so there's a way of elevating the mundane, based upon your lived experience that was foretold to you through your use of the cards or through your own innate inner knowing, your inner like watery kind of memory of the future, you know,
Yeah.
that you already possess within you, that was like put
Mm-hmm.
into you, that is like a part of the calling. You're like, like it was like given the instructions, and we're like, oh yeah, I'm remembering I came here to do something. Let
Mm-hmm.
me go forward and do that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the reading solidifies that ability to keep those moments of what is it, of numinosity, you know, of synchronicity in your own field, being like, oh, that is that card showing up. And sometimes it's not in the obvious manner of like the tower. I mean, the tower is pretty loud and obvious, right? But sometimes it's more subtle. Sometimes it's like a conversation you're having or something you're watching or reading, or it's like I had pulled temperance one day, and it was ridiculously hot. It was like in the sweltering like heat, you know, like heat, what do you call it, like
Like a
the
heat
recent heat,
wave.
the heat wave, thank you, the heat wave. You don't associate
Mm-hmm.
wave with heat, but the heat wave. And I was like outside and it was sweltering, and all I could do was go into the ocean to like literally cool off, because I didn't my apartment was too hot, everything was too hot. And I just went into the ocean, and the water was like so cold, but the warmth of the sun was like, it was such temperance. And I look into the sky, and there's the first quarter moon and the sun setting. So they're both
Mm-hmm.
luminaries are in the sky.
Mm-hmm.
And temperance is this mixing of literal solar and lunar energy and fire and water. And I was there, and I was just like blown away beyond belief of how
Mm.
the card and my trust of the card as well, like led me into that incarnation, into that
Mm.
embodied experience.
Mm-hmm.
And so I do see them as invitation, where it's like I try and find the fulfillment each day. Like I'm like, okay, I want them to guide me. The cards are my like GPS, if you will, like spiritually. They're like, turn right here or whatever, right? Yeah.
Yes. Yes. Wow. Okay. That was just kind of fireworks in my head. I really love this idea of like trying to find a fulfillment, because something that I dealt with a lot internally, as well as heard as an argument in the non-magical world around divination, which I think, by the way, also seeps into our way of being, right? Because as people, kind of playing around in the divinatory spaces, we came from that outside world as well. Like, it's not like we can be separate from it. And then, when we're done with readings, I don't know, you get your hot dog and you interact with the guy who is, from
Right.
that world. So there's no separation really. But, except with the collective power of our intention.
Mm.
And I think it's really powerful that you're bringing this idea of like trying to find a fulfillment, because I think one of the arguments against divination is that, oh, you're just, I don't know, like creating suggestions in your mind that then
Mm.
opens you up to seeing it. But I think it's powerful to, what you're bringing here is this idea that it's not just synchronicity, which I think also is a beautiful idea, but it's almost like taking it a
Mm.
step further
Mm.
of
Mhm.
like contacting your God self so that you can see how you participate in your reality.
Mm. Mm.
And I think that's
Beautiful.
so powerful. And like it is like bottoming because it is like opening yourself up, right? To like being able to see the magic. And it's
Mhm.
like, it makes me think about how divination is an act of making space for that part of you that longs to see, right? That can only be fulfilled when you see, that is afraid to go there because you've been told not to your whole life.
Mm. Wow. Oh, and that takes bravery, and that's so that, and I mean, the act of like the first time I did, gay sex stuff, it was such a transgression in terms of um giving myself permission to like fulfill that longing that was very afraid, and like
Yeah.
what there's potential pain and whatever else, right? But tenderness, but there was like honesty and authenticity and just like
Mm-hmm.
expansion,
Yeah.
and it's continuous expansion. And yeah, absolutely. I see fulfillment and destiny. Like we have fate, as you were saying, and there is so much synchronicity, and the cards will point, and I'll be like, wow, that was like, they kind of speak in this manifold way where it's, they will alert me to people's energy. That sometimes I'll get cards for people that I'm like friends that I'm going to talk to that day. And I'm like, oh, that was for them, not me. Cool. But it was in my field. You know what I mean? But on the other end, where I pull the beautiful cards, or like I'm working with the cards to envision and dream, like to give myself permission to dream of a life that is fulfilling, and full, takes my own responsibility and like embodiment to arrive at. Like I have to have agency in that. Otherwise, it wouldn't fully be real, or I wouldn't trust it.
Yeah.
And so the cards help me work out that potential, and they help me enlarge in my potential, or like my vision of potential. And so yeah, I'm always like, okay, there it is. Like there's the fulfillment. And I know T. Susan Chang kind of talks about that somewhat as well, of like if she'll get, I don't know, the tower. Like I've heard her. It's like a little funny how she says it sometimes, but I also know like the deeper, like I'm with her in the, like I know she's maybe making it a little bit less serious than it is in her own probably practice. Not to say that she's like joking, but I don't know. I just like there's something where some of it could sound a little silly, but like getting the tower and like laying on the stairs upside down and acting like, you were struck down with the tower to like fulfill the card. That's a level, but I'm always, because I recognize how deeply we've been hurt. I used to be so much part. I should be like, man, I'm so fucked up, like because of the things that have happened to me, because of the suffering I endured, and it was like, I had so much shame for my suffering and shame for what was done to me, that now I'm seeing how much resilience, and proud of my scars, and just also like I'm still standing kind of vibe. And so just the pivot of the cards to help me get to that point, where I'm like, I want them to speak to me as deeply as possible in recognition of all that I've gone through to get to this point of, in terms of like, my family was incarcerated. Like I come from the hood. Like I'm affected by these real heavy forces, and tarot is not just this like light kind of airy thing that I can dissociate with. It's like real. It's helping me really do the work.
Yeah, and I think this is something that I've been kind of talking about with my collaborator who facilitate the class, Britton LaRue, and also with our students, around the idea that the chart itself in astrology can obviously be used for spiritual bypassing, but but it's also, I think that the real power of it is like, where can dissociation actually help you get deeper into your reality? Where is dissociation a really intelligent part of the body, right? Saying, oh, I can't do this for now. And then to later be able to kind of try again, right? Because I think something that is, I don't even know, like, I'm not learned enough to pinpoint the exact idea, but there's this idea in magical thinking, right? That everything is circular, that everything is cyclical. And what does it look like to trust that even our dissociative patterns, right, or like our shame patterns, is actually helping us be more and more ourselves eventually, in this kind of cyclical thing while also honoring the fact that sometimes we do have to take active action, you know?
Hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I see it too in like the relationship to that of not, yeah, as you're saying, bypassing or ever falling into the like, let me be grateful for my abuse, which can be very
Mm,
dangerous and can get there kind of pretty fast, where he's just like, well, still have to acknowledge like there were side effects and like that didn't have to happen to you or just whatever it is, but
yeah.
that's finding a path of redemption. And by that I
Mm,
mean I did not leave the suffering that I've endured with nothing.
mm-hmm.
I have from that experience a well of compassion and patience and understanding that I can extend and pull on, and wisdom I can pull on for others and extend to others and myself, that I wouldn't have had I gone through such deep struggles, and
Mm,
like and inherited such deep struggle.
yeah.
And so it's like there's definitely distinctions there, nuance there that I want to like hold space for. But it's raw, and I'm looking towards the um for the scar in a sense. Like I don't want it to
Mm-hmm.
be an open festering wound. Like I want to be able to touch the scar and like tell a story about the scar and like use the scar. If you're gonna cut me, I better have a cool fucking story about it. And you know what I mean? Like I'm gonna profit, like, kind of vibe of like it's gonna serve me then, how can I make
Yeah.
this like serve me?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I love that so much. It reminds me of how when I was first starting to share my music, I was
Mm,
very weird about like being very upfront about my queer identity. Like it feels like kind of a bait or something. Like,
mm,
like, oh, I'm going out there and I'm like a queer artist. But
right,
one day it kind of dawned on me that, if I fucking suffered for it all my life, which I did with bullying and things like that, like I might as
right.
well now, wear it as a scar proudly, as
Mm,
you so beautifully articulated there. Yeah.
mm.
Hmm.
Same. I
Hmm.
just absolutely feel that. Yeah. It's like, here's my Scarlet Q, or
Yeah.
G or whatever. Absolutely.
Totally.
Absolutely.
Um, I would love to kind of explore this idea of communal learning with you, because I think there was something that you wrote that I know we circled around this idea a little bit earlier, that classes are a co-construction of knowledge as
Hmm.
dynamic cultivation of radical communal love. And oh, just reading that gave me like all kinds of tingles. And I'm just like, oh my goodness, that's amazing. And so I'm curious, from the perspective of someone who holds a lot of learning spaces in your life, as well as I'm sure receiving, um, the holding of that learning space as well. I'm curious how that spirit of co-construction has moved through you.
Hmm. Um, so beautiful. I just feel so seen. Thank you so much. I just love, this is just such a joy. So I'm so enjoying this. Just side note. um, so that is from certain orientations fix my practice or like are pillars of my practice,
Hmm.
right? And so, the banking model of education, which I'm sure we both were full force in of this excellent student. You learn the right answer, you say the right answer, and you
Yeah.
succeed. And me even teaching is a lot of healing of my own educational experience. You know
Hmm.
what I mean? Like I did that
Hmm.
to heal my own learning experience,
Hmm.
and to make space for like the ways that I needed and want to learn, both gentle and rigorous, both for my spaces of ignorance and my spaces of genius,
Yeah.
and there's a lot, and for other students as well. And so, as opposed to the banking model, which is the idea that like the teacher has all of the knowledge and the students are ignorant and they are just there to show up and be like deposited into like their knowledge, like to the teachers, like let me pour into you. I mean, well, a little different than pouring, but teachers can obviously cultivate their students and their sense of self-worth and what have you. But students, as we were saying, have innate knowledge and they have different knowledges, and they
Hmm.
are often, if they're marginalized, creative, complex, brilliant hybrid forms of knowledge and survival that are, um, rich reservoirs to bring into the classroom for epiphany, for intimacy, for
Hmm.
community building, for
Hmm.
laughter, for a sense of soul to be brought
Yeah.
in, and for their own, but still accountability, of course. And I think that, like, as a teacher, my, again, Jupiter Mercury energy is like really great at translation,
Hmm.
and being able to, like, as a teacher, be able to hear what one student is saying and maybe connect that to the other students, or vice versa, or like, just constant in this constant process of translation.
Oh,
um,
I love that.
but the knowledge is not a sort of it's not like a given necessarily.
Hmm.
Like, it takes, like, it's not just going to happen. Like, we need everyone's voice, we need everyone's listening and
Yeah.
response,
Hmm.
and then knowledge is made in the moment. Or the
Hmm.
muse comes through, or whatever it is. It's like,
Hmm.
bam, and it's
Yeah.
magical. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. One of my teachers, Leah Garza, uh, used the term building artisanal knowledge in
Mm,
her learning spaces. And I find that really powerful because it presupposes that knowledge is something that we all are bringing to the table and that we're all creating together using the raw ingredients from whatever it is that we're bringing. And I think a light bulb really went off from when you were saying something about translating.
mm,
Because earlier, one of our classmates and I, Verena,
mm,
and I have been doing this exchange like monthly. 1 month I would read for her, and then the next month she would read for me, and so forth.
mm,
And something that she was saying earlier today was a suggestion to see teaching as not teaching, as like using a different language. And I think
mm.
you just kind of gave me such powerful language that I think I'm going to use. Earlier, I said, I'm thinking of myself not so much as a teacher, but a psychopomp. But I think what you
Mhm,
were saying about teacher as translator is so, I mean, it's so resonant. Like there's
mm,
something there that is like, it is about being someone who can reflect to others and make the connections. Like your job is to make
mhm,
connections between people and various kinds of knowledge that's cultivated between people and the space itself.
mhm,
Mm.
mhm. And they are the water. You know what I mean? And I'm like
Yeah.
teaching us all how to surf in a sense, but there's like a collective water that I'm like absolutely making connections and across, between and across. And that's so within the reading too, where it's like I'll hear student, I think, sometimes can be shy of like, oh, okay, well, that's all I got. And I'm like, are you kidding? You just blew my mind. Like, from what you've said, I'm like, from what you've said, let's glean like all this information. Like, let me even translate it back to you,
Mm.
with the regard that I hope to inspire, like, for your own knowledge and for your own, what you're seeing, what you're perceiving. And
Mm.
of course, like, knowing how to necessarily question the nature of our reality and our perception
Mm-hmm.
constantly.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, like, to hear the voice of truth, to hear the voice of spirit within. And that's like, it'll just come through, and it just comes through into the room. It's invited into the room. And there's something where we also, like, we bring our lived experience knowledge, but we also, um, the genius can move through any of us when we're all
Mm-hmm.
willing and showing up together,
Yeah.
often
Yeah.
does.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I love that. So I kind of want to wind us down to a close in a little bit here. I'm curious to hear about all the different offerings that you have because they all sound so juicy. And yeah, tell us a little bit more
Absolutely.
about them.
I know, after this meditation on teaching, don't you want to come and study with me, with us? Please, absolutely. I would be so honored. And yeah, I primarily teach. I do consultations, but like, primarily, if you want the thrust of my work, if you will, like, it's in my courses.
Hmm.
And so there's thresholds, which I'm wrapping up a cohort right now, and that is like a foundational tarot course. We group it, week by, like, numerically. So like, there's week 0, we cover the full and just like communal parameters.
Mm-hmm.
We go through week 1 with the majors of the Magician, key arcana number 1, Justice, like 11, which is like 2 Roman numeral like eyes,
Mm.
and then the elemental aces and the pages. And so you're sort of learning like comprehensively week by week. That one is opening really soon. That one will start in November 16th. And so y'all can check out my website, the Red Read, to like enroll. And like, it's just a great foundational course to let you get into this whole language that we've been discussing today, of like seeing how the cards can read the world critically and read yourself critically and have a practice, right? Where it's, again, you're not just coming to memorize tarot meanings or how to give a reading, but you're really understanding and leaving with like a new literacy in a sense,
Mm.
right? Like, and you can go on and on after that, right? And so, but then there's Threshold Citatus, which is my extension of the course. It's sort of a deluxe version of this course. So that's like, we'll be opening at that same time of enrollment. It just continues on for like 5 months instead of 3 months.
Mm.
And we give 2 weeks to go ace through 10 of each of the four suits. So Citatus meaning like four, and this like, and it's more of a, whereas I'm constantly sort of balancing my work like a more radical read, if you will, like a of the card of the thing, like from sources that are not traditionally associated with it necessarily, but then also giving a historic background and looking critically at that. And so that section, we sort of look at the history and the artwork. I'm on you, Pamela, like in terms of the source, like I'm seeing where this is coming from. And I think that like knowing some of the historical background of these medieval images gives a lot of helpful orientation when you're reading them, because they can be so disconnected from like our daily life. Like, you know, that Two of Wands
Absolutely.
our Three of Wands can be so clear, but because we're not often like, you know, emperors like standing over our castles, like in a sense, it can be hard to like fully get. And so Threshold Citatus goes over the four suits, and we spend 2 weeks with each going 8 through 10. So it's kind of cutting it the other way. And then there's student presentations, and we focus on like our daily practice and the ritual. I've just started a year-long session with tens, which is which I'm really, really excited about. I've taught, you know, thresholds about 5 or 6 times, and like Citatus once or twice, and now like tens is like, oh, I'm so excited. It's a deck and walk. It's such a great group, and we meet. There's pre-recorded material where I've like done my own previous deck and walk, and um, getting like the majors plus the 3 minor cards of the zodiac season paired to critical texts, whether that's like a feminist text, a queer text, an indigenous text, etc. And to, again, push the tradition further, but then also in our live classes, reread like the Picatrix and like, you know, all of the ancient delineations of the decans. And then we look at our charts and within like each of the chart, you know, and so it's a really like hybrid course. It's a really beautiful Borderlands course, and it's just like so amazing. And so that's like yearly. I'm just going to keep that running for a few years. And so there'll be like I don't know, probably a winter enrollment at some point opening up for that. And then I do readings, like I said, but those are my main offerings. And so they go from like 3, 5 months to a year. I'm really a teacher who, like, I'm a hierophant as well in terms. So by teaching is a soul calling to me. Like, I'm not teaching just like your mental logos aspect.
Yeah.
I'm really caring and trying to, again, teach to the soul, and like vice versa. And so I like to form long-standing relationships with my students, and that just happens. Like, one today texted me that she found a house, and we were like working kind of like, or we were supporting her through the process of like finding a new home.
Oh.
I'm just blown away by like the student relationships that come, and so it's a really beautiful community that's growing.
Yeah.
And so I really, yeah, again, just thank you I hope that to find you there one of these days and like be
Yeah,
in your class space. And
I can't wait.
astrology's praxis. Are you kidding? I love praxis is my like word, you know, my middle name.
I love hearing about your offerings, and definitely I will be taking one of them probably pretty soon. You'll find me there. I'm curious. Actually, I wanted to ask you about this. Can you speak a little bit more about decans? Because I know about them, but I've never kind of studied them super deeply. So I'm curious to hear more about that, because I'm sure people listening will also be like, what is that? That's interesting.
Right. I know I'm such a champion of the decans, honestly. Like, I'm really like in deep. It's like I just found like a real cozy kind of spot with that being a great intersection between tarot and astrology. And so decans are a 10-degree segment of the sky, right? And so they break down the zodiacal 30-degree space into 3. And so there's like Libra 1, Libra 2, Libra 3. We're in Libra 2 right now, right? And so those like Libra 1, 2, and 3 correspond to minor arcana cards in the tarot. So it's like Libra 1 is 2 of Swords, Libra 2 is 3 of Swords, Libra 4 is 4 of Swords. So there's like a hidden, you know, storyline and like wisdom in there, and just pairing those three groups of cards together, looking at the majors: justice, the world, the wheel of fortune, and the high priestess. Yes. And so they have ancient delineations within the chart in terms of really, some of them are uncanny. Like my, shout out to Austin Coppock, who did a lot of this work with 36 Faces. T. Susan Chang, who T. Susan Chang, who did 36 Secrets, and they worked to break down this like lunar stellar calendar of the zodiac that just is a finer cut of the zodiac, but because it ties to the tarot, it can be really, really so. Like in the course, we lay out the cards of the chart. We lay out our birth chart using the whole deck, and that's pretty powerful for people. It's a pretty powerful like talismanic activation. Decans originate in like 23rd century BCE Egypt and have gone through such iteration over time, where they're primarily imagistic, like with very sparse description. And so you get a lot of the images, again, where it's important to know how to read, and it's important to, and the tradition, like why I made the tens offering, is to continuously read, like give a new read to the cards, like almost like 4 times that are in consideration of, Black and brown queer bodies and what have you. So well, Decan is also like the more mathematical, like it's acknowledging like the geometry of what it is, whereas like faces, as Austin advocates and like tarot really emphasizes as well, as the spirit. That is, that there's spirits associated with each of the like time lords in a sense, or not time lords, maybe that's the wrong word because they're astrological time lords, but it's like they're time spirits that we work with as well in the course. And like and so it's that combo again, a praxis, right, of like the spirit and the body in space and what have you. So,
Wow, so rich. I love it. Okay, so I have a final question for you, which is, I guess, 2 final questions. The first one is, so the name of this podcast is Healing the Spirit, and I'm curious to hear what comes up for you when you hear that word, whether it's, a feeling, a sensation, perceptions of opportunities and challenges, really anything that comes up for you with the word healing the spirit.
The word, like, and the notion is the sense of grief came up as a honoring of life, like it's something that you can't bypass, like it's something that does heal. To grieve, to fully let in grief feels healing. Like to give yourself permission to mourn and honor loss really does feel healing. And I've been pulling death a lot, particularly recently. And I know that it's just like, so there's so much loss happening all the time. So it's like, I think healing comes in those death rituals, in that death practice, and those rituals of letting go that then free you. And death is a great liberator, And so I think that there's something where you can let go of a burden. You can bury that. You can let that go now. You can put that to bed. You can like let that go. And that feels healing.
Wow.
Not having to have that anymore.
Yeah, I love that. It prompted me to consider and contemplate on how grieving also works with periods of times that were pleasurable for us or that were easeful, because everything passes, and it's almost like thinking about those times is more challenging for me to grieve like the happy periods of my life, or like the version of me that exists in those happy periods. It's almost more activating to grieve that than to grieve the parts that are difficult, or like the things that I've lost, because those are, speaking also having my Saturn in domicile and my Mars exalted. It's the hard parts are easy. The easy parts are the tough ones. I really appreciate that perspective. Yeah.
Yeah, same here. That was beautiful. And so
Thank you, Chris. Yeah. Finally, where can people find you? I know you mentioned your website, but what's the best way for people to reach you?
Definitely the red read, which is the color red, and then read.com is my website, where you can learn about my offerings and sign up, book a reading. And I'm on primarily Instagram. I'm on Twitter as well, but if you go to my Instagram, it's like at the dot red dot read, um, which yeah has my link tree to like other sources and sites there, but primarily those two. And so please connect, say hi, like reach out. I would love that.
Yes. Thank you, Chris. This has been so lovely. I cannot thank you enough for all the wisdom that you brought into your work and how, yeah, how incredibly it fills me up just kind of sitting with your work. So thank you.
Thank you. I feel so full. I feel so honored and just so like gracious and receiving of like so much grace from you. And so this has been an honor to be here. Thank you for sharing time and space with me.
That's it for my conversation with Christopher. I hope that you enjoyed that conversation. I hope that in some ways that conversation really spoke to you and inspire you and change the way you've been thinking about some of the things that perhaps you've been studying or that you've been engaging with for a while. And I really, really appreciate Christopher's work. I find it deeply inspiring, as you've heard me wax poetic throughout the whole episode. And so if you resonate with Christopher's work, I recommend that you check out their Instagram, you check out their website. I know Christopher always has some sort of course running and being available for enrollment. So I highly recommend that you check out their work. It's so rich, it is so powerful, and just being in Christopher's presence is already such a moving experience. So I hope you stay in touch with Christopher, and if you resonate with their work, let them know that's the case. And yeah, if you have been enjoying this podcast, if you've been enjoying this episode, I would love it if you could leave a review. Reviews are so helpful and valuable in helping others find this work. And I really started this podcast with the intention of sharing voices of the members of my community that I found deeply inspiring. And this podcast takes up a considerable amount of work, although it's all a labor of love and I really, really love doing it. I would also really appreciate that this work gets out there, that it finds the people it needs to find. So if you feel like sharing your love and appreciation for this podcast, I would love to receive a review from you or to receive a rating in whatever podcast app that you are currently listening to this in. And I also would love it if you could share with members of your community. If you feel like anybody would really benefit from listening to this conversation, feel free to send it to them or to broadcast it to your social media. All right. I am so grateful for your time, for your attention. I'm excited that you are here and that you're listening all the way to the end. And I hope that you're well. I will see you again soon if you subscribe to this podcast with, my notes about the astrological weather, any points to contemplate, as well as any conversations that are going to be on this podcast. Until then, I hope that you take good care of yourself, and I am sending you so much love. Thank you for being here. I will see you soon.